You won't survive a week with me. The words fell like ice in the middle of a silent boardroom, sharp enough to cut through confidence, sharp enough to make seasoned executives look down at their polished shoes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her reputation did that for her. And the man standing across the long glass table, holding a worn leather folder and wearing a suit that had clearly seen better days, did not flinch. Before we step further into this story, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Her name was Alexandra Whitmore, the formidable CEO of Whitmore Global Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar corporation headquartered in the shimmering heart of Manhattan. At 38, she had built an empire from the ashes of her father's failing company. She was known in every major financial magazine from New York to London as the Ice Architect. She fired without hesitation. She negotiated without mercy. She trusted numbers, not people. And standing in front of her that morning was Daniel Carter, a 34-year-old single father who had once been a rising operations manager before life had knocked him flat. Daniel's hands were steady, but inside he felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear of Alexandra Whitmore. He had faced worse: hospital waiting rooms at 3 a.m., eviction notices, the quiet devastation of explaining to a 7-year-old why mommy wasn't coming home again. No corporate battlefield could intimidate him the way those nights had. 2 years earlier, Daniel's wife, Emily Carter, had died in a car accident during a rainstorm that never seemed to stop. In one night, Daniel had become both father and mother to his son, Lucas. Grief had wrapped around him like chains, and while he struggled to hold his small family together, his previous employer decided he was no longer fully committed. He lost his job within 3 months. Since then, Daniel had taken whatever work he could find: night warehouse shifts, freelance logistics consulting, delivery routes. He learned to braid his son's hair for school projects, learned to cook pancakes that weren't burned, learned how to sit through parent-teacher meetings without feeling like he didn't belong. He learned to survive. So when Whitmore Global posted an opening for Director of Operational Recovery, a position notorious for burning out even the toughest executives, Daniel applied. Not because he believed it would be easy, but because the salary could finally give Lucas stability. A better school, a safer neighborhood, a room with walls he could paint any color he wanted. Alexandra studied Daniel as if he were a flawed proposal. His resume showed gaps. His references were solid but not prestigious. His suit was clean but slightly frayed at the cuffs. She saw risk. She saw inconvenience. She saw weakness. "You won't survive a week with me," she had said, watching for the crack in his composure. Daniel simply nodded once. Not submissive, not arrogant, just steady. He told her that he didn't need easy. He needed opportunity. Something about that answer irritated her. Or perhaps unsettled her. She hired him on a trial basis. The first week was brutal. Whitmore Global was in crisis. A failed overseas merger had cost the company hundreds of millions. Investors were restless. Senior managers were pointing fingers at each other like children in a storm. Alexandra worked 18-hour days fueled by black coffee and cold determination, and she expected the same from everyone around her. Daniel walked into chaos. He inherited a team demoralized by constant criticism. Deadlines overlapped like collapsing dominoes. Reports were inaccurate. Supply chains were tangled in bureaucracy. Every time he proposed a structural adjustment, a senior executive would dismiss him with thinly veiled condescension. At night, he returned to a small apartment in Queens where Lucas waited at the kitchen table with homework spread out like a battlefield of spelling words and math problems. Daniel would loosen his tie, wash his face, and become simply, "Dad," again. He would listen to Lucas talk about a science project involving volcanoes and baking soda. He would smile even when exhaustion burned behind his eyes. Some nights, after Lucas fell asleep, Daniel would sit alone on the couch, staring at a framed photo of Emily. He would whisper apologies for not being enough, for not being strong enough, for not being able to give their son everything. At work, Alexandra watched him. She expected him to crumble by Wednesday. Instead, she noticed something strange. Daniel stayed calm during meetings where others panicked. When 2 department heads erupted into blame, he redirected the conversation to solutions without humiliating anyone. He worked late but never complained. He asked the junior analysts for their opinions, something Alexandra had not seen a director do in years. By the end of the first week, productivity in his division had increased by 8%. Small, but measurable. It annoyed her. She called him into her office on Friday evening. The skyline behind her glowed gold and violet as the sun set. She asked him why he wasn't intimidated. Daniel answered truthfully. He had already survived losing the love of his life. He had already survived watching his son cry for a mother who wasn't coming back. Corporate pressure felt temporary in comparison. For the first time in years, Alexandra didn't have a sharp response ready. Because she understood loss. What the world didn't know was that Alexandra's father had died of a stress-induced heart attack the year their company nearly collapsed. She had blamed weakness. She had blamed emotional distraction. She had built walls so high that no one could see her grief. Daniel's quiet resilience unsettled those walls. Weeks turned into months. Daniel introduced small but powerful changes: mentorship programs, clearer accountability systems, cross-department collaboration meetings that focused on problem-solving instead of punishment. He didn't lead through fear. He led through responsibility. Slowly, morale improved. Alexandra found herself observing more than criticizing. She noticed how Daniel remembered assistants' names. How he once left a high-level strategy session early because Lucas had a school play, but sent a comprehensive report later that night after his son was asleep. She had once believed that personal life was a liability. Yet Daniel's devotion to his son seemed to make him sharper, not weaker. Then came the crisis that would test everything. A key investor threatened to withdraw funding unless Whitmore Global delivered an impossible turnaround projection within 72 hours. Senior executives panicked. Some suggested cutting entire departments to inflate short-term numbers. Alexandra prepared to make ruthless decisions. Daniel asked for 24 hours. He went home that night and barely slept. Lucas noticed his father's distant expression and quietly left a drawing on the kitchen counter, a picture of the two of them standing in front of a tall building with the words, "My dad is brave," written in crooked letters. Daniel carried that drawing in his folder the next morning. He presented a plan that didn't rely on mass layoffs but on restructuring supply chain redundancies and renegotiating vendor contracts. It was bold, risky, but sustainable. The boardroom was silent when he finished. Alexandra looked at the numbers. They worked. Against the advice of half her executives, she supported Daniel's plan. The next 72 hours were relentless. Phone calls, negotiations, recalculations. Daniel worked like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Alexandra worked beside him, not above him. When the investor finally agreed to stay, Whitmore Global didn't just survive. It stabilized. For the first time in years, applause filled the boardroom. And for the first time in her career, Alexandra felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Respect. Not for power, not for fear, but for quiet courage. Months later, she promoted Daniel to Chief Operations Officer. But the real transformation wasn't on paper. It happened the afternoon Alexandra attended Lucas's school science fair at Daniel's hesitant invitation. She stood awkwardly among colorful poster boards and excited children. She watched Daniel kneel beside his son's volcano project, listening as if it were the most important presentation in the world. She realized she had built an empire but never built a life. That evening, alone in her penthouse, she looked out at the city and finally allowed herself to cry for her father. For the years she had buried emotion under ambition. For the loneliness she had mistaken for strength. Daniel hadn't just survived a week with her. He had changed her. He had shown her that leadership wasn't about intimidation. It was about endurance, compassion, balance. Whitmore Global began implementing family-friendly policies, mental health resources, flexible schedules. Productivity did not drop, it soared. Employees stopped fearing Alexandra Whitmore. They began respecting her. And one quiet Friday, she called Daniel into her office again. But this time, there was no ice in her voice. Only gratitude. If this story has touched your heart so far, take a moment right now to like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters. And before we reach the final lines, I have a special request for you. Comment the word resilience below if you believe strength is not about control, but about compassion. Years later, when people asked Alexandra what the turning point of her career had been, they expected her to mention a merger or a stock surge. She would simply say it was the day a single father walked into her office wearing a worn suit and steady eyes. The day she told him he wouldn't survive a week. And the day she realized that survival is not about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the one who refuses to stop loving, refuses to stop trying, and refuses to let pain turn the heart into stone. Daniel Carter never set out to change a CEO. He just wanted to give his son a better life. But in doing so, he reminded an entire corporation, and one guarded woman, that even in the coldest boardrooms, humanity can still win. And sometimes, the people we underestimate are the very ones who save us.